المسلمين، نحن الذين نريد أن نقيم شرع الله في هذه الأرض. والله الذي لا إله إلا هو، لا يقام شرع الله إلا بالسلاح، إلا بالسلاح.
Welcome to Tactical Talk. This is Zain Khan. ISIS has emerged into one of the greatest threats to human civilization. With their monstrous actions against humanity and their ongoing militant assaults on the Western and Eastern world, ISIS is a problem that needs to be dealt with. Today, to discuss the topic on defeating ISIS, we have with us today Major General Paul Vallely of the U.S. Army, who has served 32 years in the U.S. military and is a senior analyst on global affairs. General Paul Vallely has also spent time on ground in Syria, which means he has first-hand experience and information on how to defeat the monster they call ISIS. General Paul Vallely is also the chairman of Stand Up America US, standupamericauS.org. Welcome to our show, General Paul Vallely. This is Zain Khan. It's a pleasure to have you on Tactical Talk.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be with you.
Major General Paul Vallely, let's get to the first question. Is ISIS a mixture of different groups, or did it form as one indigenous group out of Syria and Iraq?
Well, if you go back historically and look at what happened, around January of 2011, the protest sort of began against the Assad government because they weren't inclusive of the whole society. So peaceful demonstrations started then and then continued for several months. And then at that time, Assad decided to turn on the people that were protesting peacefully, and the people then broke apart, members of the government, members of the military, and they put Colonel Riyad in charge of a newly formed organization called the Free Syrian Army. And so from January, February, March 2011, many senior generals, officers, ministers, doctors, lawyers left the Assad government and joined with the Free Syrian Army. And so at that time, it developed into a very strong organization. It became so strong that Assad decided he would start taking on the opposition and started to bomb them and cast the military forces of Syria against the people. And we've seen what has developed since that time. I was there first time in 2012 and then again in 2013, so I got to see firsthand what was going on inside Syria. I was actually in Aleppo in 2012 with the members of the Free Syrian Army trying to vet out the different groups. And at that time, al-Qaeda wasn't there. They may have had a few in there. We saw some flags, but the foreigners hadn't come in yet. There was no al-Nusra. There was no ISIS. It was just really the Free Syrian Army, for the most part, opposing Assad.
General, what is the difference between al-Qaeda and ISIS? How is ISIS a bigger threat?
Well, al-Qaeda really started, as you know, and led by Osama bin Laden. They created training camps inside Afghanistan, and from there they began to recruit from across the Middle East, and they at that time were working out even Africa as they expanded to. And President Clinton at that time, in the late 90s, could have done things to destroy the bin Laden onslaught against Americans. Of course, then we saw September 11th, 2001 attack by al-Qaeda across in New York. So from that time on, we saw the development of more radical Islamic actions against Muslims as well as other people. But ISIS never really developed. Even in 2012, when I was in Syria, there was no ISIS at all. Nobody even talked about ISIS. And so as we've tracked it back, when the United States pulled out of Iraq, many of the Sunnis joined with some of the other groups forming in northern Iraq, primarily north of Baghdad. And so ISIS developed into a very powerful force, a very powerful recruiting force. And of course, then you knew they attacked and took over one of the major cities in Iraq called Mosul, which they made their headquarters at that time, and then later shifted as they developed and gathered oil revenues from the northern Iraq oil fields and set up their base in Raqqa in northern Syria. So it developed really over the years, developed by a vacuum that was established with the withdrawal from Iraq, and therefore we have ISIS now still controlling territory in Syria as well as northern Iraq. So that's basically the history there.
General, here's a tricky question. Both the Russian military and the American military are fighting ISIS in the region. What's the difference between both the countries' strategy in fighting the terrorist group?
Well, the Russians really came in a little after the Iranian Revolutionary Guard came in under General Soleimani, and they established themselves very strongly at that time. And so the Russians, who have been supporters of the Assad regime in Syria for decades, were asked to come in, as I understand it, and really strengthen the Syrian forces that were very weakened by the Free Syrian Army. And so as a matter of trying to keep Assad in power, rather than trying to bring together groups of people, including the opposition forces in Syria, together to move to a new government, an interim government. Of course, that's what I've recommended to the Russians in the last year, that we move to an interim government, and they move Assad out to a Dachau in Moscow or on the Black Sea. But the United States has not had a very strong strategy since they pulled out of Iraq, basically, and turned over the control of Iraq to the Shias and to Iran for all intents and purposes. The strategies have been very different. But I know for a fact from a military guy, we could take ISIS down in 90 days if we were very serious about it. The Russians seem to be preoccupied now with just going after al-Nusra and then associated opposition forces within Syria. So it's a totally different strategy. But they still are not focusing on taking ISIS out of Raqqa. And of course, they continue to send out signals that they're going to attack Mosul sometime. That never seems to occur. So it's a terrible situation, as you know, with thousands of people being killed, women, children, innocent civilians in Syria. And from that standpoint, it's still confusing. And the main focus now, as you know, is around Aleppo.
I want to know this personally, and my viewers would like to know this personally as well. What is America's narrative against Assad? Why don't they like Assad?
Well, I don't think many of the people in government today understand the true nature of of what happened in Syria in 2011 when the people started to protest peacefully, and then the Assad government turned on their own people. I don't think they understand that. I think from the United States standpoint, now until we get a new president, they're going to continue to have a very unclear strategy over there, with a great misunderstanding of who the Free Syrian Army is and who they represent. I have met with the Russians on 2 occasions, offered them up solutions for a reunification of Syria, and our government has not taken my recommendations yet, but I think the Russians seem to be going forward, understanding that they don't have to be wed to Assad, and he's been there over 20 years. His father was in there before, and so from the standpoint of Assad, he's not like his father. He has really attacked his own people and tried to really pull everybody together as these rebel forces. But there's a big differentiation between Hezbollah, who is in there at the request of the Assad government, all foreigners. You've got Chechens who have come in from Russia to join ISIS. You have al-Nusra, and then you got the Free Syrian Army. And so with all of those forces in there fighting and competing for some kind of stature within Syria, nothing will be solved, and I know this for sure, unless the United States strategy is to work with Russia to solve the situation, and working with representatives from both sides in Syria. Not only many of the generals under Assad know the generals in the Free Syrian Army. They've worked together, and they would like to see a unified Syria. And it helps also to restore and solve the refugee situation, which has plagued Europe and other parts of the Middle East. And Turkey plays a big part of this. Iran plays a big part. So someone's got to be smart enough to bring these people to the same table and come up with a solution.
Okay, Major General Paul Vallely, last question. As a high-ranking senior general, what do you think is the right strategy to defeat the militant group ISIS in Syria?
Well, I think there's a diplomatic strategy as well as a military strategy. And as we are advising our candidate who would like to see be president of the United States, Donald Trump, that we can in fact put together a coalition, work with the Russians to destroy ISIS in 90 days with our special operations forces and joint strike forces, and get them basically to lay Raqqa out of siege, also Mosul, and then with specific targeting of vehicles and the ISIS capability, we can in fact neutralize them very, very quickly and disallow them from moving from one point to another. So we can really obliterate the ISIS state in the northeast Syria as well as northern Iraq. So we're not going to divulge everything, but we do have a plan to take ISIS down in 90 days. And much of it has to do also with border control in the United States. We know ISIS is coming in to Europe with the refugees. We know they're coming across U.S. borders now. We're going to continue to see isolated ISIS-driven type of terrorist attacks in the United States. There'll be more in Europe, and there'll be more in the Middle East, just like we've seen in Turkey and other places. So this has to be done very, very quickly. ISIS cannot continue to roam the Middle East and the world as they are.
Thank you so much, Major General Paul Vallely, for being on Tactical Talk. It was a pleasure having you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
This was Major General Paul Vallely, a senior geopolitical analyst. We were discussing on the topic of defeating ISIS. He's also the chairman of StandUpAmericaUS.org. Until the next episode of Tactical Talk, this is Zain Khan. Take care and goodbye.